The first thing I noticed when I walked into my mother's living room were the legal pads. Yellow legal pads, 3 of them, lined up on the dining table next to a stack of documents thick enough to need a binder clip. 2 people I'd never seen sat on the far side of the table, a woman in a navy blazer and a man in a gray dress shirt. My brother Travis stood by the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, looking everywhere except at me. My mother sat at the head of the table, hands folded, wearing the expression she used when she wanted the world to believe she was the reasonable one. What happened in the next 2 hours changed every relationship in that room, but what none of them knew, what my mother certainly didn't plan for, was what I'd brought with me. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. I'm Myra, 33, a tax accountant from Virginia. When my grandmother passed away and left me her savings, my family didn't congratulate me. They organized. This is the story of the meeting that ended 6 relationships and started 1 boundary. Drop a comment if you've ever been called selfish for keeping what's yours, and be sure to subscribe. To understand why that table was set like a courtroom, I need to take you back 6 months. My grandmother, Eleanor Prescott, died on a Tuesday in April. She was 82. A retired nurse who'd spent 31 years at Loudoun County General, a woman who could read a chart faster than most doctors and had the patience of someone who'd held 1,000 strangers' hands at the worst moments of their lives. She lived alone in Purcellville, Virginia, in the same white clapboard house she'd shared with my grandfather before he passed 12 years earlier. I drove out to see her every Saturday, 20 minutes from my apartment in Leesburg, through the back roads where the fences lean and the pastures roll out like someone pressed them flat with an iron. I wasn't the only grandchild, but I was the only one who showed up without being asked. I managed her medications. I drove her to appointments. I organized her bills into folders she could read with her magnifying glass. She used to say, "You're the only one who shows up, Myra. Not because I ask. Because you notice." Eleanor died from complications of pneumonia. I was at the hospital when it happened. I'd been there since 3 in the morning, sitting in the chair next to her bed, holding her hand while the monitors kept their quiet count. My mother arrived 40 minutes after the call. "Traffic," she said. When the will was read, Eleanor's wishes were plain. Her house in Purcellville would be sold, and the proceeds split evenly between her 2 daughters, my mother Judith and my Aunt Lorraine. That came to roughly $85,000 each. Her savings, $210,000, accumulated over decades of careful living on a nurse's salary, went to me. My mother didn't argue about the house. She wanted the $210,000. I need you to understand my mother before you judge her. Judith Overton was 34 when my father walked out. Robert Overton, a man who could charm a room and empty a checking account with equal skill, left on a Thursday afternoon while my brother Travis was at school and I was at a playdate. He took the car, half the savings, and whatever self-respect my mother had left. He sent child support for about 14 months, then the checks got smaller, then they stopped. Judith moved us into Eleanor's house. We lived there 6 years. Me, Travis, my mother, and my grandmother. Eleanor paid Travis's tuition at the vocational school in Winchester. She kept the refrigerator full and the lights on while Judith worked 8-hour days at a preschool for $11 an hour. Those years carved something into my mother. Not cruelty, exactly. More like an accounting of debts no one had agreed to. She kept a running tally in her head of everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd been denied, everything the world owed her. When Eleanor got sick 3 years before she died, arthritis, then a fall, then the slow fade of a body that had simply done too much, Judith stepped up. She cooked meals. She cleaned the house. She drove Eleanor to doctor's appointments and pharmacy runs. She did these things because she loved her mother, and also because she believed each meal and each drive was a deposit into a ledger that would eventually pay out. When Eleanor left the savings to me instead, Judith didn't see a grandmother's choice. She saw a betrayal. 25 years of sacrifice, erased by a piece of paper. I understood her pain. What I couldn't accept was her solution. The phone calls started 2 weeks after the funeral. At first, they were gentle. "Sweetie, I think we should talk about Grandma's money. You know I took care of her. It's only fair we work something out. I told her I understood how she felt. I told her I respected her years of caregiving. I offered to help with her medical expenses. Her arthritis medication wasn't cheap, and her teacher's pension barely covered the mortgage and groceries. I can set up a monthly contribution, Mom. Whatever you need for the prescriptions and the copays, we'll figure it out together. That wasn't enough. She didn't want contributions. She wanted the whole thing. The second call came 4 days later, and the temperature had changed. You're being selfish, Myra. Your grandmother was old and confused. She didn't understand what she was doing. Eleanor Prescott, who balanced her own checkbook until the month she died and could recite medication dosages from memory, was not confused. I told Judith that. She didn't want to hear it. The third call was the one I remember most. It was a Wednesday evening. I'd just gotten home from the office, hadn't even taken off my shoes. Judith's voice was steady, the kind of steady that takes effort. You owe this family, Myra. Your grandmother would be ashamed. That sentence landed like a stone in still water. Not because it was true, because my mother believed it was. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the silence after she hung up. Then I took off my shoes, made dinner, and went to sleep. My grandmother had made her choice. I was going to respect it. Travis called the following Sunday. My brother is 4 years older than me, 37, a plumber who runs his own one-man operation out of Winchester. He's good at his work. The kind of good that comes from doing the same thing for 15 years with your hands. He is not good at confrontation, which is why Judith sent him. Hey, Myra. Listen, I'm not taking sides here. I just think you and Mom should sit down and figure this out. I leaned against my kitchen counter and waited. Travis always circled before he landed. Look, she's really upset. She's not sleeping. She says the arthritis is getting worse and she can't afford the new medication the doctor wants to try. I asked him what medication. He didn't know. I asked him how much it cost. He didn't know that either. Then he got to the point. She said, look, if you give her the money, she'll forgive the $15,000 I owe you. And she mentioned helping me expand the business, get a second van, maybe hire a guy. There it was. Not a plea for family unity, a transaction. Judith had bought Travis's loyalty with my money that wasn't hers to promise, and favors she couldn't guarantee. Travis, did Mom tell you to call me? A long pause. I could hear his work van's engine through the phone. He was sitting in a parking lot somewhere, doing this between jobs. She just thought it would help if you heard from family. You are family, I said. That's why this hurts. Before we hung up, Travis mentioned that Judith had been talking to some people about the situation. He said it casually, like it was nothing. I filed it away. In my line of work, some people usually mean something specific. The text came from my cousin Margaret on a Thursday afternoon. Lorraine told us you're refusing to share Grandma's money with your own mother. Is that true? Margaret is Eleanor's niece. Technically my first cousin once removed, but we've always just said, cousin. She's kind, practical, the type who brings casseroles to funerals and actually follows up a week later to check on you. I called her immediately. Margaret, that's not the whole story. She listened while I explained the will, the probate, the calls. She sighed. I figured there was more to it. But Lorraine's been calling everyone, Myra. She told your Uncle Hank. She told Rick. She told the Harpers across the road. She's saying you manipulated Eleanor while she was sick to get the money. My Aunt Lorraine, Judith's younger sister, 54, an administrative assistant at the local elementary school. She lived 3 blocks from Judith in Purcellville. They'd always been close in the way sisters are when they have no one else. Not out of affection, exactly, but out of proximity and habit. Lorraine had her own grudge. Eleanor hadn't left her any of the savings either, just the house proceeds. But instead of directing her resentment at Judith, who at least had a caregiving claim, Lorraine aimed it at me, the easier target. I called Lorraine directly. She answered on the second ring, her voice already set to courtroom. I'm just telling the truth, Myra. Everyone sees it but you. What truth, Lorraine? That Grandma chose to leave me her savings in a legally executed will? Eleanor was vulnerable. You took advantage. I didn't argue. I ended the call, opened my laptop, and looked up Virginia's recording consent laws. One-party consent state. I made a note for future conversations. 3 days later, my mother called with a word she'd never used before: emergency. There's an emergency family meeting this Saturday at my house. Everyone will be there. We need to settle this as a family. My mother's voice was controlled, rehearsed. She'd practiced this call. I could tell because Judith never uses the word emergency. In 33 years, through a divorce, a flooded basement, a car accident that put Travis in the hospital for 2 days, and a grandmother's death, my mother had never once called a family emergency. Whatever this was, it was staged. I called Travis. What's this meeting about? Just come, Myra, it'll be fine. Mom wants to talk things out. Talk things out with whom, Travis? Who are some people she's been consulting? He went quiet. Then, I think she might have talked to a lawyer or something, but it's nothing crazy. Just come. I hung up and called Greg Whitfield. Greg handled Eleanor's probate. He's around 50, calm the way people are when they've spent decades in rooms where families fall apart over money. I told him about the meeting, the emergency, the lawyers Travis had hinted at. Greg didn't hesitate. If they have attorneys there, you need one too. Bring copies of the will, the probate completion documents, and Eleanor's bank statements from the last 12 months. All of them. I had the bank statements because I was executor of Eleanor's estate. I'd collected them during probate but hadn't studied them closely. I'd been focused on closing the estate, paying final bills, filing the tax return. That Thursday night, I spread the statements across my kitchen table. Eleanor's checking account, the joint account she shared with Judith. 12 months of transactions, line by line. I sat there until 2 in the morning. By the time I closed the last folder, I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm. The kind of calm that comes when every number adds up to the same answer. Eleanor had added Judith to her checking account in January of the previous year. The purpose was simple. Judith would help pay Eleanor's medical bills, pharmacy co-pays, and household expenses, while Eleanor's mobility declined. The account had clear terms noted in Eleanor's own handwriting on a letter she'd kept in her files. For my care expenses only. I found that letter in the same folder as the statements. What I found in the statements was different. Over the last 8 months of Eleanor's life, Judith had made 14 withdrawals from the joint account. The amounts ranged from $2,000 to $5,000 each. The total was $47,000. I cross-referenced every withdrawal against Eleanor's medical records, which I had as executor. Medicare and Eleanor's supplemental insurance had covered her medical expenses. The pharmacy copays totaled $612 over that period. The home health aide, 2 days a week, the last 3 months, was paid through a separate arrangement Eleanor had set up with her pension. $47,000 had left that account, and none of it went to Eleanor's care. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. My mother had been withdrawing money from my grandmother's account while my grandmother was dying. Not once or twice. 14 times. Methodically. In amounts just under the threshold that would trigger a bank inquiry. I know that threshold because I'm a tax accountant. Judith knew it because someone had told her. The next morning, I called Greg. I found something. Can you meet me before the family meeting Saturday? He looked at the statements that afternoon. He looked at the cross-reference sheet I'd built. Withdrawals on one side, actual expenses on the other. 2 columns that should have matched and didn't. This looks like unauthorized withdrawals, he said. As executor, you have standing to pursue this. I nodded. I'd already known that. I just needed to hear someone else say it. If you've ever found something in your family's finances that changed everything you thought you knew, drop a comment below. I'd spent years balancing other people's books, tax returns, payroll ledgers, quarterly filings for small businesses across Northern Virginia. Numbers were my language. And now my own mother's numbers were telling me a story she never intended anyone to read. If you want to see what happened when I walked into that meeting, keep watching. Greg and I met at his office Friday afternoon. It was a small firm on King Street in Leesburg, second floor above a real estate agency, the kind of office where the bookshelves are full and the coffee is always on. We built our file together. First, a certified copy of Eleanor's will, signed 14 months before her death, witnessed by 2 independent parties, accompanied by a physician's competency affidavit. Second, the probate completion documents showing the estate had been settled properly, the contest period had expired, and the distribution was final. Third, the bank statements. 14 withdrawals highlighted in yellow, each one annotated with the date, amount, and the corresponding entry, or absence of entry, in Eleanor's medical records. Fourth, a 1-page cross-reference sheet. Medicare claims on the left, Judith's withdrawals on the right. The left column accounted for every legitimate expense. The right column hung in the air with no explanation. Fifth, a printout of Virginia's undue influence statute. Greg said something I've thought about since. Don't lead with the bank statements. Let them show their hand first. If they have attorneys, those attorneys need to see the coercion happen in real time. I looked at him. You want them to watch my mother try to pressure me? I want them to see what their client is actually doing. There's a difference between reading about it and witnessing it. I drove home and packed my briefcase. Gray blazer for Saturday, the one I wear to audits. Saturday morning came clear and cold. Early November in Virginia, the kind of day when the frost holds until 10 and the sky is so blue it looks painted. I put on the gray blazer, a white blouse, dark trousers. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and thought about what Eleanor used to say when I'd worry about difficult clients at the firm. You're stronger than you think, baby. You just don't know it yet, because you haven't needed to be. I needed to be now. I called Greg at 8. He confirmed the plan. He'd arrive 5 minutes after me, park on the next street over, and wait for my text. If everything looked normal, he'd stay in the car and I'd handle it alone. If there were attorneys, I'd text one word. Come. I drove the 20 minutes to Purcellville with the radio off. The roads were quiet. Saturday morning in farm country, trucks heading to the co-op, horses standing in fog. I turned onto Judith's street and slowed. Her driveway had 3 cars. Travis's white work van, Lorraine's blue Honda, and a dark sedan I didn't recognize. Someone else was already there. I parked on the street, took out my phone, and texted Greg a single word. Come. Then I added, there's an extra car. They brought someone. His reply came in 4 seconds. Good. Go in. I'll be at the door in 5 minutes. I picked up my briefcase, checked that the folder was inside, and walked up the driveway. The front steps were the same ones I'd climbed 1,000 times as a kid. The second one still creaks on the left side. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The living room had been rearranged. Judith had pushed the couch against the wall and pulled the dining table into the center of the room. Chairs circled it. 8 chairs, each one occupied or waiting. At the head sat Judith, her reading glasses perched on her nose like a prop. To her left, Lorraine, arms crossed, watching me with the expression of someone who'd already decided the verdict. To Judith's right, 2 people I didn't know. A woman in a navy blazer, maybe mid-40s, and a man slightly younger in a gray dress shirt. Each had a yellow legal pad and a pen. Attorneys. Across the table, Cousin Margaret sat with her hands in her lap, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Cousin Rick was next to her, studying his phone. And at the far end, in the chair closest to the window, sat my great-uncle Hank, Eleanor's younger brother, 78 years old, a retired electrician who rarely spoke and never wasted a word when he did. On the table between us, a stack of documents, 3 pens, and a binder clip holding together what I would later learn was the assignment of rights. A legal document that, if signed, would transfer my entire inheritance to Judith. My mother gestured to the empty chair opposite hers. Sit down, Myra, we just want to talk. I sat. I placed my briefcase on my lap and folded my hands over it. I looked at the 2 attorneys. The woman, Patricia Voss as I'd learn, met my eyes and held them for a moment. The man, Daniel Kemp, was already writing something on his legal pad. I looked at the documents on the table. I didn't touch them. I waited. Patricia Voss spoke first. She had the measured tone of someone who explains things for a living. Ms. Overton, your mother has asked us to facilitate a family discussion about the distribution of your late grandmother's estate. We understand there may be differing views on how those assets should be allocated, and we're here to help find a resolution that works for everyone. It sounded reasonable. It was designed to, but the documents on the table told a different story. You don't hire two attorneys and prepare an assignment of rights for a discussion. You do that for a surrender. Judith cut in before Patricia could continue. It's simple, Myra. Your grandmother was confused at the end. She didn't mean to leave everything to you. This money should go to the family. To me, the one who actually took care of her. Lorraine leaned forward. You owe this family, Myra. Your grandmother would be ashamed. That sentence again. The same words Judith had used on the phone, now coming from Lorraine's mouth like they'd rehearsed it. Maybe they had. Travis stood in the kitchen doorway, arms still crossed. He caught my eye and looked away. Daniel Kemp slid the stack of documents across the table toward me. If you could review and sign, we can resolve this today. I looked down at the papers. The top sheet was the assignment of rights. A single-page form that would transfer the full $210,000 to Judith Overton. Below it was a release of claims, waiving my right to contest or reverse the transfer. Below that, a notary acknowledgement, ready for my signature. 3 documents. 3 signatures. $210,000. Gone. I looked up from the papers and scanned the room. Margaret was staring at the table. Rick was still on his phone. Uncle Hank sat motionless by the window. I folded my hands. I waited. Judith read my silence as hesitation. She leaned forward, and her voice shifted from directive to wounded. I raised you alone, Myra. When your father left, I worked 2 jobs. I gave up my career. I stayed up with you when you were sick. I drove you to school every morning for 12 years. And this is how you repay me? She pressed a tissue to her eyes. The tears came on cue, not the kind that slip out unbidden, but the kind that arrive with an audience in mind. I watched her glance left to check if Margaret was watching. She was. I gave up everything for this family, everything. And now my own daughter sits there and won't even have a conversation. Lorraine picked up the thread. See, Margaret? See, Hank? This is what Myra does. She watches her own mother cry and doesn't even care. I cared. That was the problem. I cared so much that I'd spent 8 years being the one who paid, who showed up, who fixed things. I cared enough to sit in that chair while my family tried to dismantle me, but caring doesn't mean surrendering. Travis finally spoke from the doorway. Come on, Myra, just do the right thing. The right thing. As if signing away a legally distributed inheritance under pressure from 3 family members and 2 attorneys was the right thing. I noticed Patricia Voss shift in her chair. Her pen had stopped moving. She was watching Judith now, not as a client she represented, but as a professional observing something that made her uncomfortable. I filed that away. Then I heard the doorbell. That's for me, I said. I stood, crossed the room, and opened the front door. Greg Whitfield stepped inside. Navy suit, leather briefcase, reading glasses tucked into his breast pocket. He had the bearing of a man who has walked into difficult rooms before and left them settled. I led him to the table and turned to face my family. Perfect. Because I didn't come alone. Judith was on her feet before Greg had set down his briefcase. Who is this? This is a family meeting, Myra. You don't get to bring strangers into my home. This is Greg Whitfield, I said. He's the attorney who handled Grandma Eleanor's probate. He knows the will, the estate, and the law. He's here to make sure everything today is legal. Greg sat in the chair next to mine. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it with the quiet efficiency of a man who organizes his files the way I organize tax returns. By date, by category, by consequence. He removed a certified copy of the will. He removed the probate completion documents, and he removed a manila folder, thick and tabbed, and placed it squarely on the table between his coffee cup and the unsigned assignment of rights. I have Eleanor Prescott's complete financial records for the last 12 months of her life, Greg said. His voice carried the way a judge's does, not loud, but undeniable. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every dollar. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of consideration, the airless quiet of recalculation. Judith stared at the manila folder the way a person stares at a closed door when they know what's behind it. For the first time that morning, my mother looked afraid. Judith recovered faster than I expected. She straightened her back, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Fine, let him sit. It doesn't change anything. That money belongs to me." Greg didn't rise to it. He spoke the way he always speaks, like a man reading a closing statement to a jury that's already made up its mind. "Mrs. Overton, the will was executed properly, witnessed by 2 independent parties, and went through probate without contest. The contest period has expired. The funds were distributed according to Eleanor's documented wishes. There is no legal basis for a redistribution." Daniel Kemp, the younger attorney on Judith's side, adjusted his tie and said, "We're not contesting the will, Mr. Whitfield. We're facilitating a voluntary transfer. Ms. Overton is free to decline." Greg looked at Daniel with the patience of a man who has heard this argument before. A voluntary transfer doesn't usually require 2 attorneys, a prepared assignment of rights, and a room full of family members applying pressure. In most jurisdictions, that looks less like facilitation and more like coercion. Patricia Voss set down her pen. I watched her posture change. A slight lean back, a loosening of the shoulders. She was distancing herself from the table, physically and professionally. Lorraine tried to fill the gap. "Nobody is forcing anyone. We're just having a family conversation." Greg turned to Lorraine, his voice unchanged. "Good. Then Myra is free to say no and leave at any time. Is that correct, Mrs. Overton?" He was looking at Judith. The question hung in the room. If Judith said yes, the meeting was over. Myra would say no and walk out. If Judith said no, she'd be admitting coercion in front of her own attorneys. Judith didn't answer. She picked up her tissue and twisted it between her fingers. When manipulation doesn't work, my mother switches to threats. I've watched her do it my whole life. With landlords, with teachers, with my father's family when they stopped sending birthday cards. The playbook is always the same. If you won't give me what I want, I'll take something you can't get back. "Fine," Judith said, her voice low and hard. "If you don't sign this, Myra, you're done. No Thanksgiving, no Christmas. Travis won't answer your calls. Lorraine and I will make sure everyone in this family knows exactly what kind of person you are." Travis didn't contradict her. He stood in the doorway and looked at the floor. Lorraine nodded. "You'll be alone, Myra. Think about that." Cousin Margaret stood up. "This doesn't feel right, Judith. Maybe we should take a break and—" "Sit down, Margaret." Judith's voice snapped like a branch. Margaret sat. Uncle Hank hadn't moved since I arrived. He sat by the window with his hands on his knees, his face unreadable. But when Lorraine said, "You'll be alone," I saw his head move. A small, slow shake, barely visible. I looked at Judith. At my mother. The woman who stayed. The woman who worked. The woman who was now threatening to erase me from the family if I didn't hand over money I'd been given by a woman who trusted me to keep it. "You're threatening to cut me off from my own family," I said. "If I don't give you money I inherited legally? Is that what you're saying? In front of 2 attorneys?" Judith met my eyes. "I'm saying there are consequences." Greg wrote something on his legal pad. I didn't need to look to know what it was. He was documenting. My mother sat across from me, flanked by lawyers and relatives, and told me I'd be alone if I didn't hand over my grandmother's savings. If you've ever had someone use family as a weapon, not a shield, a weapon, you know exactly how that chair felt. Stay with me. Because what I said next, I'd been preparing for my entire life. I opened my briefcase. The click of the latches was the loudest sound in the room. I removed the certified copy of Eleanor's will. The original was on file with the court, but this copy bore the seal and the stamp. Before we go any further, I said, I want to read something. I turned to page 3, section 2. I leave my liquid savings to my granddaughter, Myra Elaine Overton, for her faithful care and companionship during my final years, and because I trust her judgment above all others in this family. I let the words settle. Above all others in this family. Eleanor hadn't written that by accident. She'd chosen every word the way she'd chosen every medication dosage in her nursing career, with precision and intention. Judith's jaw tightened. She was sick, Myra. She didn't know what she was signing. Greg answered before I could. Eleanor signed this will 14 months before her death, during a period when her primary care physician confirmed full cognitive capacity. The document includes a competency affidavit signed by Dr. Alan Ferris. It was witnessed by 2 parties with no financial interest in the estate. He placed the physician's affidavit on the table. She knew exactly what she was doing, I said. I wasn't trying to wound my mother. I was trying to tell the truth. Sometimes, those are the same thing. I set down the will and placed my hand on the manila folder. I want to talk about something else now. Not the will. The room shifted. Patricia Voss looked at the folder. Daniel Kemp stopped writing. Judith's hands went still. I want to talk about the joint account. It was a small shift, but I watched it move through the room like a current. Lorraine frowned. What joint account? She genuinely didn't know. That surprised me. Judith hadn't told her sister about the arrangement with Eleanor's checking account. She'd kept it between herself and the bank. Grandma Eleanor added Mom to her checking account in January of last year, I explained, keeping my voice level. The purpose was to let Mom help pay medical bills and household expenses while Grandma's mobility declined. Eleanor documented the terms in a personal letter I found in her files. The account was for her care expenses only. Travis, from the doorway. So what? Mom paid the bills. I looked at my brother. Some of them. I opened the folder. Behind me, I heard Judith's chair move. Not a scoot. A flinch. Myra, don't. I paused. I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. The woman who'd raised me, who'd stayed, who'd stretched $11 an hour across 2 childhoods. I saw her fear. Not the manufactured fear of losing control. The real fear of being seen. Don't what, Mom? She didn't answer. The room waited. I laid the bank statements on the table. 12 pages, arranged by month, each one highlighted in yellow where a withdrawal appeared. I placed them side by side so the progression was visible, a timeline of money leaving Eleanor's account during the last 8 months of her life. 14 withdrawals, I said, totaling $47,000, each one between $2,000 and $5,000. None of them match any medical bill, home repair, or care expense in Grandma Eleanor's records. I placed the cross-reference sheet next to the statements. It was a simple table, 2 columns. On the left, every Medicare claim, insurance payout, pharmacy receipt, and home health aid payment connected to Eleanor's care. On the right, Judith's withdrawals. The left column balanced to the penny. The right column hung in open air, connected to nothing. I checked every transaction, I said. It's what I do for a living. Judith's face had gone gray, not red. Gray. The color of a person watching a structure collapse from the inside. I had expenses, she said. Her voice was smaller now. Taking care of her isn't free. My time, my gas, my... Greg spoke, and his voice was the voice of consequence. Virginia law is specific about fiduciary duties on joint accounts, Mrs. Overton. Withdrawals beyond the account owner's documented care needs can constitute conversion. In plain terms, that's the unauthorized taking of another person's property. Someone gasped. I think it was Margaret. She had her hand over her mouth. I looked at Uncle Hank. He was looking at Judith. On his face was something I'd never seen there before. Not anger, not shock, but a deep, settled disappointment. like a man watching a prediction he'd hoped was wrong come true. Travis stepped out of the doorway. He stood at the edge of the table looking down at the bank statements the way you look at something you can't quite process. "Mom, you took money from Grandma's account?" Judith turned to him, and for a moment, just a moment, she wasn't a strategist. She was a mother caught. "It wasn't stealing, Travis. I was her daughter. I spent 3 years of my life taking care of her. I deserved—" "You told me Myra was the one taking advantage," Travis said. His voice was flat, stripped of its usual evasions. "You told me she manipulated the will, that Grandma wasn't in her right mind, but you were the one." He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. I watched my brother in that moment and saw something I hadn't seen in years, the raw edge of someone realizing they've been used. Travis looked at me. His eyes held shame, confusion, and the beginning of something that might have been understanding. He'd come to this meeting believing Judith's version. He'd called me on a Sunday, repeating Judith's talking points because he genuinely thought I was the problem. He didn't know about the $47,000. He didn't know about the assignment of rights until today. Judith grabbed Travis's arm. "She's turning you against me, Travis. That's what she does. She uses numbers and documents to make people feel—" "Facts," I said quietly. "They're called facts." Travis looked at his mother's hand on his arm. Then he pulled away, walked through the kitchen, and sat on the back porch. I heard the screen door close behind him. My brother chose the exit. Not my side. Not Judith's side. The door. I'd spent a lifetime covering for people who chose exits. Patricia Voss had been quiet for several minutes. She sat with her pen resting on the legal pad, her notes untouched since the bank statements came out. She looked at Daniel Kemp. They exchanged a glance. The kind that happens between professionals who've arrived at the same conclusion and are deciding who speaks first. Patricia won. Or lost, depending on your perspective. "Mrs. Overton," she said, addressing Judith. "May I have a word with you privately?" Judith's chin lifted. "No. Whatever you want to say it in front of everyone. I have nothing to hide." Patricia paused. She folded her hands on the table, and when she spoke, her voice had shifted from advocate to officer of the court. "Mrs. Overton, based on what's been presented today, I have significant concerns about the nature of this meeting. You've asked a legal beneficiary to sign over assets that were lawfully distributed through probate. You've done so in a room arranged with family members who were briefed beforehand, using prepared legal documents, after what appears to have been a sustained campaign of pressure through family channels." She paused. "This has the hallmarks of undue influence. As an attorney, I'm obligated to tell you that I cannot participate in proceedings that may constitute coercion." Judith stood up. Her chair rocked backward. "You're my lawyer. You're supposed to be on my side." Patricia remained seated. "I'm an officer of the court first, Mrs. Overton. I can't be party to what appears to be coercive conduct. Daniel and I are withdrawing from this matter, effective immediately." Daniel closed his legal pad. He capped his pen and placed it in his shirt pocket. They both stood. Patricia looked at me on her way to the door. "Ms. Overton, you may want to document everything that occurred here today, for your records." The front door closed behind them. The room was smaller without them. The silence lasted maybe 10 seconds, but silence in a room like that stretches. Judith stood at the head of the table with her hands flat on the surface, breathing through her nose. Lorraine sat frozen, her certainty cracked, but not yet broken. Margaret and Rick exchanged a look. Uncle Hank hadn't moved. Then Travis came back. He'd heard everything through the kitchen window. He stood in the doorway. Same spot he'd been all morning, as if the threshold was the only place he could exist, neither in nor out. He looked at the assignment of rights still sitting on the table, unsigned. He looked at the bank statements next to it. And then he said the thing that will stay with me longer than anything else from that day. "Just sign it, Myra. It's not that complicated." After everything, after the bank statements, after the attorneys walked out, after the truth was laid open on that table like a patient on an operating table, my brother still wanted me to sign. Because signing would make the problem go away. Not solve it. Just make it go away. Lorraine found her voice. Travis is right. This has gone on long enough. Sign the papers, Myra, and we can all go back to being a family. I looked at Lorraine. We were never the kind of family you're describing, Lorraine. Uncle Hank's voice came from the window like something breaking the surface of still water. Quiet, but absolute. Lorraine, sit down. She sat. There are voices you don't argue with. Not because they're loud, because they've earned the right to be heard. Hank turned to Judith. Judith, Eleanor told me about the joint account. She told me what she suspected. I didn't want to believe her. The room went still. Even Judith stopped breathing. Uncle Hank spoke slowly, the way a man does when he's waited a long time to say something and wants to get every word right. 3 months before she died, Eleanor called me on a Saturday night. She said, Hank, I think Judith is taking money from my account. I don't want to believe it, but the numbers don't add up. She'd been watching the statements. She couldn't get to the bank herself anymore, but she could still read. He paused. His hands were still on his knees, steady. She asked me to keep an eye on things. She said she wanted to make sure Myra got the savings. She said Myra was the only one she trusted with the truth. Judith's voice cracked. Dad's brother is lying. He never talked to Mom about. I have the phone records, Judith. Hank's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Date, time, duration. And I kept notes. What your mother said. What she asked me to do. Because she asked me to write it down. Because she was a nurse. And nurses document. Greg leaned forward. Mr. Prescott, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement to that effect? Hank looked at Greg. I'd have given one 6 months ago if anyone had asked. I sat in my chair and let that settle through me. Eleanor hadn't left me unprotected. Not through magic, not through a dramatic hidden letter. Through the thing she'd done her entire career, documentation. She'd noticed the numbers, the same way she'd noticed a patient's vitals shifting before anyone else on the floor. She'd recorded. She'd delegated. She'd trusted the process. My grandmother had protected me the way she'd protected everyone, by paying attention. I stood up. I gathered the bank statements, the will, the cross-reference sheets, the competency affidavit. I placed them in the manila folder, aligned the edges, and closed it. Every movement was deliberate. An accountant closing a file at the end of an audit. Mom. My voice was steady. Not cold, steady. I'm not going to sign that paper. Not today. Not ever. Judith opened her mouth. I continued. Grandma Eleanor left me this money because she trusted me. She watched who came and who didn't. She kept her own records. And the reason she didn't leave the savings to you isn't because she didn't love you, it's because she knew. I paused. I let the weight of that sentence fill the room. Then I said the thing I'd been carrying since the first phone call, the thing my mother had thrown at me like a verdict, the thing Lorraine had repeated like a chorus. Grandma Eleanor would be ashamed, but not of me. Judith made a sound, not a word. Something deeper. The sound of a weapon turned back on the person who forged it. Her own sentence returned. She sat down slowly, like her body had decided before her mind. I turned to face the room. Margaret, Rick, Hank, Lorraine, Travis in the doorway. I came here today prepared to be called selfish, ungrateful, and disloyal. I've been called all three in the past month by people in this room. But I also came with the truth. Every document, every receipt, every dollar accounted for. That's not selfishness. I placed my hand on the folder. That's accountability. Greg stood beside me. He buttoned his jacket. The small, unconscious gesture of a man preparing to deliver something final. I want to be clear about what happens next, he said. As executor of Eleanor Prescott's estate, Myra has standing to pursue recovery of the $47,000 in unauthorized withdrawals from the joint account. Virginia Code Section 64.2-457 addresses fiduciary breach on accounts held with a vulnerable adult. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table, the statute, printed and highlighted. Additionally, today's meeting, the prepared documents, the coordinated family pressure, the explicit threats of estrangement, constitutes evidence of attempted undue influence. The two attorneys who were here earlier and withdrew may be called as witnesses if this matter proceeds to court. Judith sat in her chair. Whatever had been holding her upright, the conviction, the entitlement, the 25 years of resentment she'd built into a fortress, had crumbled. Not all at once, in stages, like a wall losing its mortar. Lorraine had gone pale. She was doing the math that Lorraine always does. Not the moral math, the personal math. If Judith went down for the withdrawals, would Lorraine be implicated? Had she received any of that money? The fear on her face suggested an answer. Greg continued. Myra is not filing today. She wanted to give you the opportunity to understand the position you're in. What happens next depends entirely on you, Mrs. Overton. I added quietly, I don't want your money, Mom. I never did. But I won't let you take mine, and I won't let you rewrite what Grandma Eleanor wanted. The assignment of rights sat on the table between us. Unsigned, useless. A plan that had collapsed under the weight of the truth. Judith stood up so fast her chair scraped across the hardwood and hit the wall behind her. Her hands were shaking. Not from weakness, from the kind of rage that builds in a person who has spent decades believing they are owed and is now being told, in front of everyone, that the debt was never real. You think you're better than me? Her voice filled the room, high and raw. You sit there with your suits and your lawyers and your spreadsheets, and you think you're better? She swept her arm across the table. The assignment of rights, the pens, a coffee mug, all of it hit the floor. Coffee splashed across the hardwood and pooled against the baseboard. I raised you, she shouted. I fed you. I stayed when your father left. I worked 2 jobs while you sat in that house and did homework and got your little degree and built your little career. And this is what I get? My own daughter treating me like a client? The tears were real now. Not performed. Not timed. The tears of a woman whose narrative had been dismantled in front of the only audience that mattered. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I watched my mother the way I watch columns that don't balance, with patience, without surprise, and with the understanding that the answer is already in the numbers. You're right about one thing, Mom, I said. You did stay, and I will always be grateful for that. But staying doesn't give you the right to take what isn't yours. I bent down and picked up the bank statements that had scattered when she swept the table. I stacked them neatly, tapped the edges straight, and slid them across the table toward her. Here. It's not that complicated. Travis's words, given back. Judith stared at the stack. The room was silent except for her breathing and the slow drip of coffee off the table's edge. Lorraine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Travis stood in the doorway. He'd heard everything. He'd done nothing. Cousin Margaret was the first to speak. She stood, smoothed the front of her sweater, and looked at me with the expression of someone putting down a weight she'd been carrying since Thursday. Myra, I owe you an apology. Lorraine told me things that I should have called you first. I should have asked. I'm sorry. I nodded. That was enough. Cousin Rick didn't speak, but he looked at me and tipped his chin. The silent acknowledgement of a man who knows he should have said something earlier and didn't. I accepted that too. Uncle Hank walked around the table. He moved slowly, the way 78-year-old men move in November. Deliberate, careful, every step a decision. He stopped beside me and placed his hand on my shoulder. His palm was rough and warm. Your grandmother would be proud of you, he said. You did this right. I put my hand over his, just for a moment. Lorraine made one last attempt. This isn't over. We'll contest the will. We'll go to court and... Greg answered her without looking up from his legal pad. The will has already been through probate, Ms. Hadley. The contest period expired 4 months ago. Any challenge at this point would require new evidence of fraud or incapacity, neither of which exists. He looked at her then. And if you'd like to discuss the $47,000 Mrs. Overton withdrew from Eleanor's account, I'm happy to do that in a more formal setting. Lorraine went quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't silence but surrender. Judith had sat back down. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the table, at the assignment of rights she'd brought, unsigned, and the bank statements she'd never expected to see. Her face held something worse than anger. It held recognition. I closed my briefcase. The latches clicked shut with the same sound they'd made when I opened them. Clean, mechanical, final. I looked at Judith one more time. My mother. The woman who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. The woman who worked when the world gave her nothing for it. The woman who had, somewhere along the way, turned her suffering into a currency she believed everyone else should pay. Mom, I said, if you want to talk, really talk. Not negotiate, not strategize, not send Travis or Lorraine to do it for you. You know where I am. I'm in the same apartment I've been in for 5 years. Same phone number. Same person. She didn't respond. I didn't need her to. I picked up my briefcase and walked to the door. Greg followed. Uncle Hank walked out with us, his coat over his arm, his keys already in his hand. He wasn't staying either. Outside, the air was cold. November in Northern Virginia. The kind of cold that doesn't bite but settles into you, reminds you that the year is almost done. I stood on the porch for a moment. The same porch where Eleanor used to sit with me in the summers, shelling peas into a metal bowl while the radio played inside. She'd count the peas as we shelled them. Old habit from the hospital. Count everything. Measure everything. Trust the numbers. Greg stood beside me on the steps. You handled that well. I handled it like an accountant, I said. I showed my work. He smiled. That's exactly what I mean. Hank zipped his coat. What are you going to do about the 47,000? I'll give her time to do the right thing, I said. If she doesn't, I'll file. The drive back to Leesburg took 20 minutes. The same 20 minutes I'd driven 1,000 times, past the leaning fences, the horse pastures, the old feed store on Route 7 that's been closed since I was in high school. The radio was off. I didn't want music. I didn't want noise. I wanted to sit with what had just happened and let it find its place. I thought about Eleanor, how she used to say, "Numbers don't have opinions, Myra. They just tell the truth." She'd said it when I was 16 and struggling with trigonometry, and she'd said it again when I was 26 and wondering whether I'd chosen the right career. She was right both times. The numbers at that table hadn't had opinions. They'd just told the truth. I thought about Judith, the mother who stayed, the mother who worked, the mother who had, by her own reckoning, earned something the world refused to give her. I didn't hate her. I'm not sure I even blamed her entirely. But understanding someone's pain doesn't mean you let them redistribute it onto you. I pulled into my apartment parking lot and sat in the car for a while. The engine ticked as it cooled. The dashboard clock said 11:47. The whole meeting had lasted less than 2 hours. 2 hours to rearrange a family. I took out my phone and opened the family group chat. The one Judith had started years ago. The one where she posted photos of her garden and Lorraine shared recipes, and Travis sent pictures of plumbing disasters that were only funny to him. I scrolled to the bottom. Then I left the group. Not in anger, in clarity. I texted Margaret separately. Thank you for speaking up today. She replied in under a minute. A single heart. 2 weeks passed. Judith didn't call. Travis didn't call. Lorraine didn't call. The silence was louder than any of their arguments had been. But things happened in the background, the way things do when legal mechanisms start turning. Patricia Voss sent a formal letter to my office, certified mail, notarized. It stated that she and Daniel Kemp had withdrawn from representing Judith Overton and summarized what they had witnessed at the meeting. Coercive pressure, prepared legal documents designed to extract a signature, explicit threats of familial estrangement. The letter was addressed to me, but it was really addressed to a courtroom that might need it someday. Greg filed the documentation of Judith's unauthorized withdrawals with the probate court as part of my executor duties. The court opened a review. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. A review. The legal system's way of saying, we see this, we're watching. Cousin Margaret called to invite me to Thanksgiving at her house in Centerville. Nothing fancy, she said. Just turkey, my mom's stuffing, and people who aren't going to ask you to sign anything. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks. Uncle Hank started calling me every Sunday evening. We'd talk for 15 or 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather in Purcellville, a documentary he'd watched, whether the Nationals had any hope next season. He sent me a photograph one Sunday. Eleanor in 1973, standing in front of Loudoun County General in her nursing whites. Young, fierce, smiling the way she smiled when she knew something no one else in the room had figured out yet. Travis sent one text, 3 weeks after the meeting. I didn't know about the money, Myra. I read it. I didn't reply. Not out of spite. I just didn't know what to say to someone who chose silence when speaking up would have mattered. 3 months after the meeting, the probate court ruled. Judith was ordered to repay $47,000 to Eleanor's estate, which, as sole beneficiary of the liquid assets, meant to me. Her new attorney negotiated a payment plan, $800 a month. Judith was furious, but the alternative was a civil judgment and a lien on her house. She chose the payment plan. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. My mother was sending me $800 a month because she'd stolen from her own mother. That's not a victory. That's an outcome. I took $10,000 of the inheritance and donated it to the hospice where Eleanor spent her last days. I set up a small scholarship in Eleanor's name at the community nursing program she'd attended decades ago, the Prescott Nursing Scholarship, $2,000 a year for a student who shows up and pays attention. I moved to a slightly larger apartment, still in Leesburg, with a second bedroom I use as an office. I adopted a cat from the shelter on Cornwall Street. A calm gray tabby with green eyes and a habit of sitting on my tax returns. I named her Ledger. 5 months after the meeting, Travis called. The conversation was short and careful, like two people crossing a frozen pond, testing each step. He said he was sorry. I said, I appreciate you saying that. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I didn't close the door. I left it shut with a doorbell. If he wants to ring it, he knows where it is. Judith sent a letter. Handwritten, not typed. 2 pages of her small, slanted script. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. Why she felt the way she felt. What those years had cost her. How losing Eleanor's trust had broken something she didn't know how to repair. I read it once, folded it, and put it in the drawer of my nightstand. Maybe someday I'll read it again. Maybe I won't. Some things need time to settle before you can see them clearly. Like numbers that don't add up, sometimes you have to step away from the desk before the error reveals itself. My grandmother left me more than money. She left me proof that someone in my family saw me clearly, not as a resource, not as an obligation, but as a person worth trusting. The inheritance was $210,000. The lesson was priceless. You don't owe anyone the things you've earned just because they're family. Love is not a ledger, but respect has a balance, and it has to go both ways. That's Myra's story. A assignment of rights she never signed. A folder of bank statements that told the truth. 2 attorneys who walked out on their own client, and 1 grandmother who trusted the right person. If you've ever been the one in your family who shows up, does the work, and then gets told you owe more, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment, subscribe,